Hey, a great group of Montanans with the Real Montana Group just got back from a trip to India. Of course, they travel all across Montana visiting different, whether it's a lumber mill or, a coal mine or a steel fabrication. It doesn't matter, whatever, metal fabrication facility, whatever. They'll go to it as part of the Real Montana Group, but they also do an international trip usually every year. This group just got back from India. Lori Shaw with Colstrip United here in studio with us, and many of you know her from her work with Colstrip United supporting the great Colstrip power plant and the coal mine out there and the jobs and the power that produces. But for any of you who've ever met Lori, she's got really long, very blonde hair. In fact, I think for Halloween she dressed up as Elsa from the movie Frozen, the Disney movie Frozen. But yeah, Lori, you were like a celebrity over in India, huh? It was pretty crazy from looking at a lot of your pictures.
Yes, I drew a lot of attention. I stuck out a little bit, didn't really blend in much, but I liked it. When people would come up to me, they'd ask me for pictures, and then we would end up having a conversation, like, where are you from? All of that, and the people there were just so nice. It gave me the chance, like an excuse to start up these conversations with people, and they were all positive, to be honest.
So what was the most interesting thing that you took away from your trip to India from a Colstrip perspective?
Boy, that's hard to narrow down, but I guess I'll give you one example that really struck me. So a lot of our visits, a lot of our tours in India were agricultural related, which was wonderful for me coming from a background that wasn't necessarily agricultural, even though I live in a rural area. And we visited one farm where the farmer told us that they only have access to electricity for irrigation for only 4 hours a day. And that really hit home for me because it perfectly illustrated how the availability of affordable, reliable energy is impacting people all over the world and not just in my own backyard.
Yeah, we take everything so for granted here, especially power right now, when there's people who think we can so easily just sacrifice our coal plants, so easily sacrifice our coal mines, when the rest of the world is hungry for this type of energy. I mean, they need clean water, they need power. It's just remarkable the differences there. And where all did you guys travel throughout India? Tell us where all you made it to.
Okay, so we were gone from November 2nd to the 14th, and we landed. Yeah, we landed in Mumbai. We went to Delhi, then we went to Agra and Ludhiana, and it was actually really amazing to see the bigger cities first and then go out into the rural areas. We were there during Diwali, which is India's Festival of Lights. It's basically their equivalent of Christmas. So things were very festive. You could see the lights everywhere. And, it was just an amazing time to visit India, for sure.
Yeah, well, we've also got on the phone lines with us here Rose Milasani out of Cascade, Montana. Rose is an ag extension agent out of Cascade. Rose, thanks for calling in this morning. From an ag perspective, what stood out to you from your India trip?
It was so amazing to see how much they can do with 2 acres year-round. We got the opportunity to travel to a family farm, and I asked him, I was like, well, what is this plant coming up? What did you plant here? And it was in its very infancy stages. It was alfalfa, and they put it in for 4 months, where Montana we put it in for, a good 10-year crop is a young crop. Anywhere from 25 to 50 years is where we have our alfalfa fields in. But also the extension that literally is across the whole nation of India and how they utilize. They're doing a lot more soil testing. We've been doing soil testing for a long time. But we also got to visit some agricultural colleges and see what research they're doing there. And it just hit home because it's like going back to Montana State University, going to all those field days across Montana from Sydney to Moccasin, anywhere to see what new research extension is doing in their nation.
I know pulse crops, Montana has quickly grown into a leader in pulse crop production, peas, lentils, things like that. But the prices are expected to kind of be depressed here for a little while longer because India had put these tariffs in place. And they weren't retaliatory. We didn't put tariffs against them, but they put them against us. They had kind of a good crop year, as I understand it, so that's why they felt they could put tariffs in against. But did those types of discussions come up, or were you able to twist some elbows, twist some arms while you were over there to try to get those tariffs dealt with?
Well, we didn't specifically talk about tariffs, maybe on side discussions, not with the large groups, but we did talk about pulse crops because, like you just said, pulses are number one in Montana nation. we're the number one producer of pulse crops, whether it be chickpeas, lentils, all of that stuff. But talking to them and seeing their crop rotations, they do a lot of marketing. The little farmers do a lot of marketing locally. And what Extension over there and what other marketers are trying to do is get those small markets out to bigger markets. So they're trying to take little fields that are growing chickpeas or rice or whatever, and not just selling them in the villages, but selling them statewide, countrywide, and internationally. And they're trying to get that up and going. And that was a pretty interesting thing to listen to, because when you hear about pulses in India and how much they consume, and you think that they're shipping, these small little farmers are shipping them out a lot, where they're just getting up and going, and they are shipping them a lot. They're getting a better infrastructure so that they can market their crop.
Tell you what, Rose, hold that thought. We got to take a quick break here on Montana Talks, but I understand some Montana farmers made some pretty good trade connections while they were over there too. We'll get to that right after this.
Serving the great state of Montana, from the peaks of the Beartooths to the banks of the Clark Fork River. This is Montana Talks with Aaron Flint.
All right, we've taken you to Colstrip, we've taken you to Cascade. We're going to take you to Melville and Miles City here shortly as well with Montana Talks. The phone number, if you want to jump in on the conversation, you got a question for one of the ladies that took part in this Real Montana trip to India, what they saw, what they talked about, what they learned, what they shared. Give us a ring, 406-294-0970. Got a phone line open for you right now. I want to go back to Rose Melisari, Cascade in Cascade, Montana, an ag extension agent. Rose, thanks for staying on. I hope I pronounced your last name right there.
It's Melisani.
Melisani, that's right. Okay, there we go.
It's an awesome last name.
That is a great last name, yeah. Well, and I really appreciate all of you calling in last minute, too, here. We're also going to get to Kimberly Gibbs and Benita Kramer here shortly, so I appreciate you all patiently waiting so we get a chance to hear from everybody, and especially since we kind of lined this up a little last minute. But, I was chatting with Lori Shaw from Colstrip United earlier, and she was saying, there were some people on the trip who, hey, the pulse crop farmers, they made some actually really good connections over in India while they were there. Might help with business.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a couple farmers that come with us, and a couple sheep ranchers, and it was awesome to see them networking and getting that connection, because it doesn't matter if you're 2 miles down the road or on the other side of the world. Networking is extremely important, and that's what's so great about Real Montana, is that not just only at the international seminars, but at the other seminars, you get to meet people that you've never met before that can help your businesses and help your lifestyle, and that's pretty amazing to see.
Yeah, and it's a big market over there, of course, and that's what our number one industry depends on, is on these international markets for our products. Was there one, did you have a funniest moment of the trip that when you got back to Cascade you were telling everybody about?
My family raises bred heifers, and we sold our bred heifers before we went, and actually I sold some yesterday. And it was funny to talk to the brand inspector before I went to India and then after I went to India. And we were talking about cattle and how sacred they are, and we were joking about how, we over here are bred heifers and our cattle are sacred to us because that's what puts the money in the bank, and we love raising them. And then we were talking about sacred cows, and then we were talking about their buffalo. And dairy is huge over in India. They do a lot of dairy cows. And then when those dairy cows, either they don't produce enough or they're ready to go out to pasture, they literally go out to pasture. And they're considered very sacred. When we were, I believe, in Mumbai, we saw a cow and she had a fifth leg coming out of her shoulder. And she was considered extremely sacred because of her deformity. But we also talked about water buffalo and how cool they look and how much, milk fat they get from their milk from there and how sacred animals are. That's the coolest thing that I've been able to take back from India and talk to people around Cascade, Montana.
Yeah, I know for some of the people it was tough not having a lot of beef to eat. Lori was telling me. So there, you ate a lot of water buffalo, I guess, and some chicken and who knows else what along the way.
Yeah, goats and a lot of pulses, and their food is extremely wonderful to eat, and it's very hot. And from being mild over here to eating that, it was quite the experience. So it was a lot of fun. It was a great learning experience, and I would recommend anybody who maybe has an inclination of applying for Real Montana to do it, because of the opportunities that you receive and also the support you get from the sponsors and from anyone who puts on that event. It's amazing. Program.
Yeah, in Real Montana, if you just Google it, real easy to find, and I know they work closely with the other with MSU and the other Ag Extension offices across the state as well. Of course, you're the Ag Extension agent there in Cascade. Rose, really appreciate you joining us. Thanks for calling in.
Thanks. Have a wonderful day.
All right, you too. 406-294-0970. If you want to jump in on the conversation, let's take you to Melville, Montana. Benita Kramer on the phone lines now. Benita, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you today?
Doing great. I love Melville. For folks who've never, made that trek and jumped off the main roads and the main interstate, great little town that it's kind of known for that historic backdrop with the crazy mountains in the background and that little white church there with the crazies in the background. I think even the Dave Matthews Band shot a music video there.
They did. Yeah, they did. It was big news in a small town, yeah.
That's right. So what was your highlight of the trip, or what did you take away from it?
Well, it's interesting that you were just talking about the crazy mountains. I'm sitting here right now. I can look out my living room window, and that's exactly what I see. That fills up my windows of my home. And, my biggest takeaway was how different their environment, their physical environment is from ours. Of course, everyone knows that you don't drink the water in India, and you didn't. We had one individual in our group use some ice cubes in his drink, and he paid the price for it. He got violently ill. But he
didn't go to Tijuana before and learn that already. I take it. That's why you eat the spicy food.
Well, I don't know that the food was as much a problem as the water was, honestly.
Yeah.
So,
well, the spices
we
kill
have to be really careful about that. And, you'd see these ditches along the roadside that were just floating full of disgusting garbage. And, I mean, you couldn't even stand the smell of it. The environment, the air quality, it was so terrible there from several factors. I mean, it's a land of 1.3 billion people, and in fact, our tour guide told us if you go 100 meters in India and don't see another person, something's wrong, and that's very true. Even in the rural parts of India that we visited, you saw people everywhere you went. So what was really impactful for me was this perspective that I have now of how truly special it is that we live where we do, and that we have these abundant resources at our fingertips. That it is imperative that we protect wisely and we responsibly use those. That we protect our air, we protect our water. And when you visit another country and you see the challenges they're dealing with, and you see what we're doing here, you know that we're on the right track. We're doing the right things, and we need to continually be proving what we're doing is the right thing to be doing. I don't think that's always wrong. I think when we're unfairly beat over the head, that's when I'm going to get my neck bowed up, and I'm going to fight about that. But I have no problem telling folks what I do daily, every day, because I'm proud of what I do, and I know what I'm doing is the right thing. So I think there's nothing wrong with questioning that, with having our consumers question what we do. But what's wrong is when you're not treated fairly.
Yeah,
that's what's wrong.
When the real news doesn't get a chance to get out, when the facts don't get a chance to get out, when agriculture or coal mining is unfairly attacked without the ability to respond. Yeah, is my thoughts there on that. Do you have kind of a funniest story? We're talking with Benita Kramer out of Melville, Montana, who was on this Real Montana trip to India. They just got back just before Thanksgiving. Do you have kind of a funniest story, or just something that you think would be insightful to other folks across Montana that stood out to you?
Well, I think truly what stood out to me was just the sheer number of people, and how different it is to come home to Montana. We have just barely 1 million people in the whole state, and to be able to truly have some elbow room and some space is kind of something that I think I didn't realize how important that was to me until I saw how different that was in India. There's very little privacy, if you will.
Yeah.
It's a land of extremes: extreme wealth, extreme poverty. The people that are living in extreme wealth are living, quite frankly, just across the road from extreme poverty. And neither one of those seem to be able to make a connection in the middle. However, we were told that India's middle class is a growing economy and that there's going to be some changes. I think over the next couple of generations, India is going to probably end up looking much different than it does right now. I think that middle class is going to demand a lot more responsibility from their government and a lot more responsibility from their people. And I do truly believe it's going to look much different than it does now. But I just think the biggest takeaway for me was just the sheer number of population and what that really looks like, what that sounds like, what that smells like. It's very impactful.
Yeah, you think we're not even a million here, or just over a million here in Montana. I was looking at, I think this is according to the World Bank statistics here, 2017 in India, 1.3 billion with a B people in India. So, yeah, you're definitely thankful to be in a place like Montana after you've been surrounded by that many people. Well, Benita, really appreciate you calling in this morning as well, and keep enjoying the view there of the Crazies in Melville.
I'll do that. Thank you.
All righty. Great to chat with you here. 406-294-0970 if you want to jump in on the conversation. We'll have more with Lori Shaw from Colstrip United. Plus, they've got a meeting coming up in Colstrip as well. So many of you have been following this coal fight over the past few years. Big meeting coming up. We'll tell you about that. And we'll take you to Miles City. Kimberly Gibbs, ag instructor at Miles Community College, was also on the trip. So we'll hear from her right after this.
So Dickey's really has everything you need.
Whether you're left, right, or somewhere in between, Montana is talking here. This is Montana Talks with Aaron Flint.
All right, we're going to talk more with Lori Shaw from Colstrip United here in just a few minutes. Here on Montana Talks, we're talking with the crew from Real Montana. So it's a leadership organization. Basically, it stands for Resource, Education, Agriculture, Leadership. Real Montana. Of course, very involved with Montana State University and the Ag Extension agents. In fact, it was kind of fun talking with the Ag Extension agent out of Cascade earlier, and we mentioned how some farmers that were on this trip actually made some really good business connections while they were overseas in India, and I believe one of them actually bring Lori Shaw. Lori Shaw, was it Jillian Street? Did I pronounce that right? Okay. Yeah, so she's tell us about Jillian and her operation, I guess, and her visit to India.
Absolutely. So Jillian Street is a pulse crop farmer from Chester, Montana. Her family also runs a pulse processing facility. I got the wonderful privilege to tour it actually this summer. Amazing. And so when we toured these pulse processing facilities or these pulse growers in India, obviously she had plenty to talk about, and she made some connections that she expressed a lot of excitement about. And she actually said something at one point when talking to one of the farmers that I remembered. It really stuck in my mind, and she said, "Isn't it wonderful that agriculture is a global language? It's a language that spans all cultures because we all need to grow our food." It was really that was a very good point, because no matter where you went in India, if she was talking to somebody who knew how to grow anything, she had something to talk about.
Well, it was kind of cool, too, because our friend, the rabbi in Bozeman, Chaim Bruck, he commented on, because I put on my Facebook page, by the way, that's facebook.com/Flint Report. I talked about how we were going to have Real Montana on, and anyway, he's joking around, what are Real Montanans? Am I one? Which is a great little comment he put on there. But then he said, hey, actually, he knows Jillian Street, because her company certifies kosher. So that was kind of a cool, another Montana connection with this whole trip. Let's take you to Kimberly Gibbs in Miles City. Kimberly, thanks for joining us here on Montana Talks. Good to chat with you.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Yeah, and thanks for patiently waiting. So you're an ag instructor out at Miles Community College, as I understand it. Was this your first year involved with Real Montana?
Yes, I'm in the class 3 with Lori and everybody else. So yes, this is my first trip, or first international trip.
First time overseas, huh?
Yes.
How was it for you?
It was quite the experience. Some of the issues, they may be a country of 1.3 billion people, but some of the problems they face is finding workforce for some of these farms and agriculture production areas. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. They're a very proud country. They're proud that they're self-sufficient for the most part for their food. So that was interesting.
Yeah. What was some of the takeaways that you took from your perch as an ag instructor at Miles Community College?
You know, I think one of the things is going over, we see pictures, we look at National Geographic, but I think actually seeing that what we're seeing in some of these magazines, what I teach the class about some of these countries still using hands to harvest their crops is actually true. The students have asked me, what'd you learn? What'd you see? And you tell them, they're like, really? That is still happening in the world. So I think that was the biggest take home for me is, you know, we take a lot of things for granted. We have our big John Deere tractors. Over there, they may have a little Mahindra tractor to plow their 2-acre field. So I think the comparing and contrast for students to hear from me has been important for them to learn from my perspective. Also, it tells them, you know, you can do anything you want. You grew up in Montana, but yet you can still go overseas. You can still travel. So I think that was something they learned from me going as well.
And where else have you been here in Montana as part of the Real Montana Group? What else have you learned here in-state in addition to the overseas trip?
Let's see. We went to Colstrip, learned about the coal and power. We went to Lewistown to learn about agriculture production in Montana. We visited a feedlot there as well as a grain facility. Sydney, oil and gas in Sydney. We will go to Butte to learn about hard rock mining in January. So, you know, we're rounding up, we're finishing off Real Montana Class 3 in the next 4 or 5 months.
Yeah. Well, and it was it's kind of interesting too, because I think a lot of folks maybe who aren't familiar with agriculture live in the bigger towns here in Montana. I hate to call any town in Montana a city, just because that has a bad connotation to it. If you ask me, we're all towns. If you ask me here, but I know talking with like my friend Haley Shipp, for example, who's who is a farm broadcaster and still in radio here in the state. And I remember her saying, hey, look, when she became a farm broadcaster, look, she grew up on a ranch. So she had to learn a lot about the grain side of the house. So whereas I think the misconception for a lot of people in the bigger towns in Montana is, well, if you grew up on a farm, you know everything about agriculture, or you know everything about rural issues, period, when logging might be a foreign concept, or even the grain side of the house might be a foreign concept to somebody who's typically just more focused on cattle.
Yes, I think just kind of, I teach ag here at a small community college in Miles City, and I think seeing something that we do on the eastern side of the state and what's happening on the western side of the state can be completely different, and then bringing that back to students and sharing with them what I've learned or how they may do it different, it opens up their eyes to maybe look at different ways they can take back to their farm and ranch if they plan to go back to their farm and ranch in eastern Montana.
I'll throw kind of the same question I threw to Rose out in Cascade, but do you have kind of the funniest story or maybe just the most interesting story that you're sharing with your students back in Miles City following the trip?
I think just how much they do a lot of their work by hand. They're harvesting their rice by hand. They're hitting it against a barrel to knock the grain off. I think that was the biggest take home for me was, they're still using their hand. They're out in their fields every day. They're seeing what's happening. Another thing from just an ag standpoint, we're used to wide open spaces. I think every place we saw has been touched by a human in India. Every square inch of it has been cropped or lived on. So that was interesting to me, that it was a very, very old country that has a lot of history.
Yeah. And Lori Shaw at a Colstrip is here as well with Colstrip United. She was on the Real Montana trip to India. Lori, you were even saying you went to things like a mushroom farm. I mean, you saw different things that you wouldn't normally expect, right?
Yes, absolutely. We got to see some things that I would have never had the chance to see in Montana, or at least not in the same capacity that you can see it in India. We went to a rice mill. Touring the rice mill was amazing. We went to a mushroom farm, and I do know that there are mushroom farms starting up in Montana. I know of a couple in Bozeman, actually, but they weren't at the same level that we saw in India. So that was pretty incredible. There was just a lot of different agricultural things that we got to see and tour that were really unique.
Yeah. And Laura was telling me earlier, too, Kimberly Gibbs, if you want to weigh in on this, that, just some of the practices are so out of date in some of these other countries that also contributes to air pollution. Where they'll just burn their fields after they harvest the crops, for example. And so it's yet another reminder of how far ahead the U.S. is and our producers are when it comes to the environment, too.
Right. That's something else. I had a cold from the day I left Montana and got over there, and the air pollution was just terrible. But they burn all of their crops when they're done harvesting, and it goes up into the atmosphere. I mean, there were days you couldn't see them half mile in front of you. It was smoky. I guess they're trying to reduce that. They realize it is a problem, and there are some practices going into place to encourage farmers not to burn and to use more, leaving the residue on the field. So that was good to see that they're trying to improve the air quality of the country, but it's still a culture thing where they're going to burn the field.
Well, Kimberly, really appreciate you joining us on Montana Talks this morning. Thanks for telling us about the trip, and thanks for joining us.
Yes, thanks for having us.
All right, good chatting with you.
Yes.
All right, the phone number for you if you want to jump in on the conversation, 406-294-0970. In fact, we got more folks calling in. This is great. We got more folks calling in who were on the trip this morning, pretty much unplanned. We had Lori lined up for this morning, and then we said, hey, yeah, tell your friends who were on the trip to join us here as well. So, Lori, great job packing the show for us here this morning. That point about pollution, I think, is really interesting, and about how much more advanced we are, and about, especially what Kimberly was saying about not even being able to see some days because the smoke and the pollution was so bad. I forget where I saw this. It might have been in the Big Sky Business Journal, but, I mean, coal production elsewhere across the world, coal production has been on the rise, or not coal demand. The demand for coal has been on the rise. Places like India, places like China, they have access to coal. They don't necessarily need coal from Montana just to have coal. They have access to coal, but they want access to things like Montana coal because it's cleaner coal. It's the Powder River Basin coal that burns much cleaner. That's why places like China and India want more of that, to actually help with their pollution problem. And yet, crazy folks in this country think we need to do away with coal, with that great, beautiful, clean coal. Kind of crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely crazy. It doesn't make any sense.
What else do we say on that front, huh?
Yeah, it is a little bit astounding that getting to see in person, knowing that the people in India, they would literally kill to have what we are, at least some of us, are pushing to throw away. Yeah,
they would look at us like you're crazy. Like, wait, you have this and you're trying to do away with that?
Mm-hmm.
Man, I don't know what, I know they'd call you Mzungu as the white foreigner in Africa, but there's got to be like a crazy Mzungu. There's got to be a term in India for a crazy Mzungu or something. Think about getting rid of their coal power. You've got a big meeting coming up for Colstrip United, an informational town meeting for Colstrip. So for those all across the state who followed this war on coal and the radical environmentalists trying to shut down Colstrip, I'll tell you about this meeting coming up. Plus, we got Jeff Wellborn on the line from Dillon. So we'll talk with Jeff right after this.
Broadcasting live across the great state of Montana. This is Montana Talks with Aaron Flint.
Yeah, I can't believe this is only the third group of Real Montanans. RealMontana.org, by the way, is the website if you want to find out more. Maybe you're listening to this and you're like, hey, how do I get to be a part of that organization? I don't know if they've selected their next class yet or not. But anyway, check out RealMontana.org if you're interested in being more a part of this. But I know they've got folks who, loggers, they've got folks who work in mining, they've got folks obviously in agriculture that we've been hearing from this morning. So, but anyway, it was, I think, must have been the first year maybe that, we got a phone call from, I got a phone call from, I think Joe Dooling out of Helena was in China along with Brian Massard. A rancher out of Dillon, Montana. They both called in. I think we were using the WhatsApp app that a lot of people use overseas. It's what I used overseas to be able to call back home, frankly. You could video chat, call. But anyway, they called in from China, and they were talking about the feedlots, how you'd have your steakhouse, your restaurant right next to the feedlots over in China because they were all about fresh food, all about, having the meat hanging right there, just like their fish markets. You'd have the fish, and you'd get to pick out the fish that you were going to eat. The same thing with their feedlots for beef or pork or whatever that they were seeing over there. But yeah, now Brian Massard, of course, is the president of the Montana Stock Growers Association. operation, rancher out of Dillon. But luckily they got another great guy out of Dillon taking part in the Real Montana crew as well. Jeff Wellborn now on the phone lines with us. Jeff, hey, congrats on being in the Real Montana crew. How was the India trip for you?
It was good, and Aaron, thanks so much for having us, and thanks, Lori, for taking the initiative to get this all set up. But it was an awesome trip. I'm still thinking about it. It's pretty much all I'm thinking about these days. It's interesting how, when I turn my sink on in the morning and clean fresh water comes out to brush my teeth, that it's something that we take for granted until you visit a place like India, and then all of a sudden it becomes front of mind of awareness. Is things like that.
Yeah, were you the guy that accidentally drank the ice, or ate the ice cubes over?
No, but I do know that guy. No, it was not me.
Yeah, that's why you eat the spicy food, to kill the bugs.
I guess so. They've had 4,000 years to adapt to the food they eat and the water they drink, and us gussics that traveled from the States, probably not so much, so maybe it takes a little longer to get used to everything. I don't know. Goat
meat isn't bad. Did you try some goat meat? We ate goat kebabs in the little bazaars all the time in Afghanistan.
I did not. I pretty much become pretty friendly with a plain bowl of white rice and a little bit of warm vegetable broth or whatever that I can put on it, and just kind of bided my time for the time I was there.
Yeah. Well, what stood out from you? Because I know you've served you've served in public office here in Montana. Obviously, understand the private sector as well. What stood out to you during your trip?
I'll tell you what I think that the two things that stood out the most to me was as vastly different as we are. Also the similarities, and two of them really stuck out in my mind. We had the opportunity to visit with a trade association for the steel mining and milling industry in India, and I found it. The question was asked to the panel of people that spoke to us that afternoon. What their biggest challenges were. And without even thinking about it, the regulatory environment is what come out of their mouth. And it's just like, me looking around, not knowing any different, I thought, that's the one thing. There's no regulations here. There's, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of environmental regulations for sure, or a lot of other kind of regulations, safety regulations or whatever, or being enforced anyway. But yet they were talking about the regulatory environment as their number one challenge. And we also, I believe it was there and elsewhere, the same questions were posed, and labor is a big issue. And you would think in a country with 1,300,000,000 people, and a lot of them seem to be unemployed, that jobs, and especially like the steel mining and milling industries, would probably be better than average jobs in pay and benefits and whatever. They certainly are in our country, but yet labor shortages were, good labor, steady labor, dependable labor seemed to be one of their biggest challenges too. And I found that fascinating. I didn't think that those were the two things I was going to hear of being challenges in India. But,
yeah, with 1.3 billion people, you'd think they'd have enough to fill those jobs, but we've got a labor shortage, in large part back here in the United States right now as well. Jeff Wellborn, really appreciate you calling in from Dillon. Sorry we're out of time, but great to hear from you.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Yeah, great chatting with you. We're out of time, but unfortunately, Lori Shaw, I know there is a meeting Wednesday night, 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. in the Colstrip High School auditorium, Colstrip United informational meeting. So big deal coming up. But Lori did make a great point during the break. They want our coal in India, but they're like, you guys can't build any ports. You can't build that port in Washington State. How are we going to buy coal from you? We want your cleaner coal. We got our own coal, but we want your cleaner coal. But we can't build that port out in Washington State, so we got to get that job done. All right, thanks for being with us.